He seemed quiet. He was reserved. To many who crossed his path, he even appeared shy. But behind that thoroughly ordinary appearance was one of the most horrifying serial killers in American history. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're taking an objective look at a case that continues to deeply unsettle the public consciousness: Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee monster. We're going to break down the timeline, the methods, and the profound institutional failures that defined his story, examining the crimes that literally shocked the world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. The Monster Next Door: Appearance versus Reality. On the surface, we see a guy who was just socially awkward. He lived alone, he worked simple, unglamorous jobs. There was absolutely nothing obvious that suggested he was dangerous. But then, we look at the reality. Behind closed doors, this unassuming man became known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, committing acts so disturbing they fundamentally altered American criminal history. It's a chilling reminder of how a perfectly normal, mundane mask can hide a terrifying truth.
To understand the scale of this whole thing, let's set a quick baseline. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Ohio. For the first part of his life, he was really just another face in the crowd. But, as we're going to see, the trajectory from a regular boy born in the Midwest to a globally infamous convicted serial killer, well, it certainly wasn't an overnight shift.
Which brings us to Section 2, Ignored Warning Signs. Because the clues to his true nature were actually there from a very young age.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the psychological red flags were actively waving right from the start. Dahmer showed disturbing behavior early on. Over time, his social isolation didn't just persist, it actively increased. And most notably, he developed a really dark, intense fascination with death and anatomy. These weren't just quirky little traits, they were fundamental warning signs of the psychological path he was walking down.
But here's the absolute most tragic reality of this early timeline. These signs went entirely unnoticed, or they went unreported for years. Nobody connected the dots, nobody intervened at all. And because those early warnings were just brushed aside or missed completely, the stage was officially set for what was to come.
Moving on to Section 3, Methods of a Killer. Let's look at the calculated mechanics of his terror between the years of 1978 and 1991.
The mechanics of his crimes were highly calculated. Step 1, he specifically targeted young men, often meeting his victims in public places where he could just blend in. Step 2, using his unassuming demeanor, he lured them back to the privacy of his apartment. And Step 3, once they were isolated, he committed unimaginably violent crimes, followed by deeply disturbing efforts to hide the evidence. It was a cold, incredibly methodical cycle of terror.
If we break down those methods a bit further, we see a heavy reliance on strict psychological and physical control. He used manipulation and deception to build this false sense of trust. He incapacitated his victims by drugging them, and in perhaps his most infamous and disturbing practice, he actually kept the remains of his victims. His overarching goal here was complete, total control over the people he targeted, all while carefully maneuvering to avoid detection for as long as humanly possible.
And that leads us to perhaps the most frustrating aspect of this entire case. Section 4. How the system failed.
So the crucial point is, despite multiple warning signs, and despite his ongoing crimes, he was actually arrested more than once. The system quite literally had him in custody, but he was released. Due to a series of massive legal and procedural failures, he was just let back out onto the streets.
Looking at this timeline reveals exactly how devastating those failures were. Born in 1960, his crimes begin in 1978. But then, look right there at those middle years. He's arrested, but released. Because the authorities failed to look deeper, his killing spree was allowed to span over a decade. It wasn't until 1991 that he was finally permanently stopped. It's just a glaring, tragic failure of the very institutions designed to protect the public.
Section 5. Discovery and Aftermath. The climax of the story and how the spree finally ends.
The break in the case didn't come from some sprawling police investigation. It came from a survivor. In 1991, a victim miraculously managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and immediately contacted the police. That is the turning point. When authorities finally entered Dahmer's apartment, the discovery was just beyond comprehension. They found photographs and human remains that instantly confirmed the staggering scale of his crimes. The horrific evidence of multiple murders was sitting right there, abruptly ending his spree in a single night.
Following his arrest in 1991, Dahmer was charged with multiple counts of murder.
The trial that followed was, as you might expect, extremely publicized. The whole world watched as shocking testimony and gruesome evidence were presented in court, and this brilliantly illustrates just how overwhelming the physical proof against him actually was. The legal conclusion was swift. He was found guilty on all charges.
But Dahmer's story didn't end with a life sentence playing out quietly. In 1994, just a few years into his sentence, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed in prison by another inmate. His life was officially over. But, as we know today, the public's intense interest in his crimes and the massive lessons we still need to learn from them certainly did not die with him.
Even today, this remains one of the most heavily studied cases in modern history. And why is that? Mostly because he appeared perfectly normal to so many people, allowing his crimes to evade a failing system and go undetected for years. It forces us to take a really hard look at the bystander effect. It's a foundational case for both criminology and psychology, but perhaps most importantly, it's a huge driver in discussions around law enforcement reform, highlighting exactly what happens when the system fails to protect the vulnerable.
I want to read this quote directly to you because it really hits the nail on the head regarding everything we've talked about today. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is not just about one person. It's about missed warnings, system failures, and how dangerous people can sometimes hide in plain sight. It's a heavy realization, isn't it? It's not just the story of a monster. It's the story of a society that somehow failed to see the monster standing right next door.
And that leaves us with the most disturbing, haunting question of all. A question that should continuously drive us to be more observant and demand way more from our institutions. How many lives could have been saved if something was noticed earlier? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions and never stop looking beneath the surface.